Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a brand new Vote2Moon webinar. Here we are with you. Our colleagues from NET, Bill and Darren are already here. I'm Enrique from Vote2Moon. I'll be supporting you guys with this webinar today. We still have more 3 minutes to go, so please just hold tight for a few more minutes and we'll get started. Meanwhile, if you guys could use the chat that you have on the lower right side of your screen, just to tell me that you have sound and video, that you can listen to me, and also that you can see our videos, me, Bill and Darren. If you can just confirm to me in the chat that you have this the video and the audio, I will appreciate it. Okay, thank you, Ashley, Brian. So just bear with us for a couple of minutes and we'll get started in 3 minutes. Thank you, guys.
There's a chat button. Can't see that.
Bottom.
Whereabouts on the bottom now? I can't see it.
The bottom right, so the bottom right part of the screen, you have like this white box, which is the chat. So you have a few people saying good morning or good.
Ah, got it. Yep. Pressing the wrong button. Story of my life.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we are just waiting a couple of more minutes so our last colleagues can connect and we'll get started in a bit. We are already ready. I'm Enrique from Vote2Moon and Darren and Bill from NET are already here with us. Just give us a couple of minutes and we'll get started. Cool. So 1 p.m. in the UK. So if you guys don't mind, we can get started. So here we are, one more webinar on our electrical apprentice project within Vote2Moon UK. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I also want to thank the entire team of NET for supporting us on this project. Thank you very much for Darren, Bill, and everyone from the NET team for being here with us. Today we're going to be talking a bit about the AM2S End Point Assessment and everything you guys need to know to make it right. And we're going to be here for a few minutes. In the end of this webinar, we're going to be open for any of your questions. So you can use the chat that you have on the bottom right part of your screen to place your questions. You can place your questions now or later. In the end of this webinar, I'm going to read them through for our friends from NET, and they will give us all the answers they can. Well, that's all from my end. Bill, Darren, thanks for coming. They are all yours.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, over to you then, Darren.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar we've held as NET. This is geared towards the preparing for your AM2S, which will include from electrical apprentices and training providers, which will give good support in that aspect for your preparation for the AM2S. Okay, we've compiled it from a lot of experience within what we've done so far, so it'll be include all aspects of what we've covered. So my name is Darren Oates. I'm the NET Technical Development Manager for AM2S, and I've been with NET now for just over two years. So yeah, just enjoy the presentation, and look forward to your questions at the end.
Yeah, good morning. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Bill Lockyer. I'm the NET Quality and Verification Manager. Basically look after everything to do with the quality aspects of the AM2, AM2S, AM2E, and support all the technical development managers. And again, I hope you enjoy the presentation, and it's really just to get yourselves sorted out for the AM2S, which, as you should all be aware, is part of the endpoint assessment.
Okay, so the overview of today's content of the presentation. We'll go into about NET. For those of you who are not aware of what NET do and how long we've been established, that aspect, we cover everything in there. What is AM2S? A lot of people know it as an endpoint assessment. What is AM2S? We're looking in detail at the checklist, the personal preparation side of the checklist, and ensure your assessment ready. The AM2S sections, the breakdown in the sections, especially with the new introduction of the assessment breakdown into the sections we derived to. The pre-assessment manual, which is a key document for all apprentices undertaking endpoint assessment. We'll give you a good introduction on that. Running then into common errors. So we've collated some errors we've encountered through our moderation processes as technical managers. We've come up with some just images really demonstrating these common errors we're finding on a day-to-day basis. Marking and resitting, the process for the requirements for that. Resits, and then also it's important the misconceptions of old adage with NET. So we cover some of the misconceptions we hear on a regular basis there. We're going to show you the NET resources, or just show you how you can obtain them and what they are. And then at the end, we'll finish off with a question and answer session on there. So just hope you enjoy.
Okay, a little bit about NET then. What a lot of people don't probably realise is that NET is actually a registered charity. We're non-profit making. We're not out to make money. What we basically do is any profits that we do make actually goes back into the industry. We are also responsible for the endpoint assessment, which is the AM2S. And for that, we've been actually carrying out assessments of competence since the 1980s. We were originally, the apprenticeships back in those days were originally on time served. So didn't matter how well you were good at your job, as long as you did 4 or 5 years, you were deemed a qualified apprentice at the end of it and had completed an apprenticeship. So it was 1983 when they actually decided that perhaps they ought to have some form of competency check to make sure that you hadn't been sat on your toolbox for the last 4 or 5 years and that you could actually physically do the job. So that's when the AM2 actually came into being, and it was part and parcel of the, at the time, industry training boards. So it was looked after by the Construction Industry Training Board originally. Once they got dissolved, it then became part and parcel of a statute, part of law as such, and has been going ever since. Some of the things that we actually get involved with is skill electric competition, which actually showcases various learners from all over the country give them some good experience of working under pressure, of actually carrying out a fantastic job, and it actually gives you a vehicle to get into things like world skills. So there are other opportunities out there as well, but it's just to make sure that NET are there as a measure of gaining that step over from all your training into actually being a competent person into the world of work. So what we've got now is basically, what is the AM2S? So what we've actually got here is a little short video for you, which is also on our website, which can give you an overview.
Play the video now. Darren and Bill, if you can just mute yourselves for a second. And everyone, the audio of the video can be a bit loud, so you can have audio controls just below the video. The audio control is individual, so you can change the audio as you wish.
Test. You spend weeks or months learning how to drive, then the driving test is where you put everything into practice and you're marked against strict criteria. The AM2 and AM2S are just like this. It's an in-depth assessment where you have to carry out specific tasks to show what you've learned during your apprenticeship. The whole test is around 16 hours long, split over 2.5 days, and it's broken down into different sections, such as installation, fault finding, safe isolation, and inspection and testing. Strict exam conditions are in place during the assessment, so this means no electronic devices or getting help from anyone else. You'll be monitored by an assessor who will be marking your work as the day progresses. Once you pass the assessment, it's one of the final pieces of the puzzle to completing your apprenticeship and becoming a fully qualified electrician. Your training provider will tell you which assessment you'll be taking, the AM2 or the AM2S. This simply depends on which type of apprenticeship or training program you're following. It's really important that you don't take the test until you're 100% ready. You can use our self-assessment checklist to work through everything you need to do. Use it during the last few months of your apprenticeship. Talk to your employer and training provider and make sure you're comfortable with all areas of the test so you're fully prepared before booking. The NET website gives you much more information on the AM2 and AM2S and each section in detail, the checklists, how to best prepare and what happens during the assessment. Visit netservices.org.uk to find out more.
Okay, so if you can move on to the next slide, please, Bill. Okay, so there's a host of resources on the NET website, which we'll touch on later on. But just moving on to the next slide. This is regarding the AM2 checklist. And Bill's responsible for checking these on a regular basis, as well as the other members of the team in NET. So we're just going to go through the importance of the AM2S checklist in relation to the assessment. I think sometimes they can be undervalued and just filled in as an exercise, and it's not a true reflection of where the candidate actually sits, which is probably a reflection in this moment in time in the attainment values. I know the attainment it gets a bit of negative press on certain platforms, but actually the candidate checklist is an integral part of the assessment process. So we're encouraging and trying to promote this checklist as honestly as possible. So just a few instant tips regarding this checklist, okay? This maps out each section of the assessment process. So when you fill in this checklist in, be honest and brutal with yourself in the fact that this is a true reflection of that assessment you were just about to enter. So if there's any areas of weaknesses within there, you need to be honest and sort of self-reflect and sort of mark yourself down on where your weaknesses are, because this is your only opportunity as an apprentice to say to your training provider and your employer, I'm not ready for assessment at this stage. I'm not sufficient in this particular area. It's then up to your training provider and employer to put measures in place to give you further training. And this is quite important. If you any areas of weaknesses, your training provider and your employer have to put areas of training in place for you to improve your skill sets. Okay, so I can't emphasize that fact enough, and Bill will, I'm sure, will back that up from his point of view as well. So that's the importance of it. We are going to look at in the next few slides at some of the content of the checklist, just for you to get a sort of understanding and a feel for how important that is, which has been gauged into this sort of the assessment there. So again, just to summarize, be honest with yourself, as you're only setting yourself up to fail. In that case, you're wasting money and with a reassessment, and then, you know, Net gets a reputation, oh, I got to resit again, I got to resit. But that's actually, you've declared this to us, so you're ready for assessment. Everybody goes through is ready for assessment, as far as we're aware. As an endpoint organisation, that's all we look at, okay? And just be aware that training providers and employers pushing you to get in to undertake endpoint assessment when you're not ready. Okay, there's funding involved, there's payments involved for your funding, so forth. So if you're not ready as an apprentice, you need to be honest and tell them straight, I'm not ready for assessment. You know, we really appreciate how difficult this can be due to sort of timely completions in some instances and the funding involved. But pick the phone up, you know, if you can pick the phone up to your rewarding body, or pick the phone up to anyone else. If you feel as if you're being bullied or pushed into actual endpoint assessment, please speak out and tell someone about that. And the checklist must be signed by all parties and must be submitted before an assessment can be booked, okay? So the three parties would be yourself as the apprentice, the training provider and the employer will all sign them together, ideally around the table, and that's where it's all signed off on that checklist. So looking into further detail at the checklist content, okay, you will see each part of the checklist is itemized, and they're itemized in line with the assessment of AM2. So A1, for instance, is the safe isolation risk assessment. It's clearly asking you, what is your knowledge at present in relation to A1, safe isolation and risk assessment? So that is where you are today as you fill this form in. Are you at the limited, adequate, or extensive, or unsure? So you've got to be honest when you fill that in. Your experience, your practical experience. Have you participated? Are you aware of putting a risk assessment together? Have you done it? So this is really important stuff. And as you can see, A2 to A6, now we're talking about the install now. Are you adequate in all of these areas as a minimum, really? And where you are limited in any aspect of this checklist, you require further training. You are declaring and agreeing with your employer and your training provider around the table, I need further training in any aspect of that practical content or knowledge, so forth. So that's the crucial. And bear in mind, I'll emphasize, the A2 to A6 is the install bit. So if there's any shortcomings within this, it's probably going to be reflected in your endpoint assessment as well. Okay, it's no good saying I'm limited, but I'm still going to go for assessment because the chances are you're going to fail that section. Okay.
So one of the things you've got to think about is your own personal preparation. You've been in a training environment and you've probably seen the same people for about the last 4 years within that environment. So they've got a good understanding of you as an individual. What you've got to be really sort of like prepared for is thinking a little bit outside the box. The first one we've got on that one there is that any reasonable adjustments need to be communicated and evidenced at the time of booking. The number of times that has come up to us that all of a sudden, oh, I used to have extra time at college because I've got an issue with spelling or dyslexia or anything like that. Anything that you've been accredited for during that training period, please make it known, because it means then that we can allocate extra time to the online assessment. And what we can then do is notify the centre if you need a reader. Also notify them if you need extra breaks. Although we can't actually increase the time of the assessment, but what we can do is that you can actually have a break, read through the candidate manual, and then they'll stop the clock and then they'll carry on. But we need to know that beforehand. Do a little bit of investigation, because the centre where you're going to take your AM2S is not going to be on the doorstep where you've done the training. Have a look, see if what the parking arrangements are. Can you park easily? Have you got to take a bus, train, whatever? So make sure you know where that test centre is and those parking arrangements, so that you're not harassed on the morning that you actually physically start the test. Also, because we're all aware at the moment of the current COVID restrictions, make sure that you're aware of any possible COVID restrictions on that centre. We've put out communications to all AM2 centres to operate within government guidelines, and what a lot of centres are on at the moment is a bit of reduced capacity. But they've made arrangements so that tools are wiped down, bays are cleaned, and there's social distancing and all the rest of it. So be aware of any restrictions or procedures that you need to do with that AM2 centre. Be prepared to get there on time. Don't leave it to the last minute because there may be a traffic accident or a detour. Make sure that you arrive at the centre in plenty of time, and make sure you know what the start time is, because their start times vary between centre and centre. Once you're in there, take time to read instruction manuals. The test gear that you may be using in an AM2S centre may be different to what you've been used to at work or in college. So the centre should have all the manuals available for you to quickly go through so that you're familiar with the pieces of equipment that you're actually going to use for testing and inspection.
And that's quite a common one, Bill. That is a test. You turn up at the centre, they're not familiar with we've got a few appeals through that of recent regarding the type of instrument they've been asked to use, and they're not familiar with it. So that's quite a common one.
Absolutely right. I mean, you've been may well been used to a multifunction tester on site, and then all of a sudden you go to a centre where it separates. Just a simple thing like that, or you've been used to a fluke and they've got a metro. So just make sure that you read the manuals and you know exactly what they'll be doing, or what you'll be doing when you come to do that part of the assessment. The other thing is it's always a little bit of a shock, because the person that's actually going to do your assessment, you've probably never ever seen him before. All right, it's going to be a totally different environment, because when you've been doing test and inspection at your training provider or college, you know that the guy that's actually doing your assessment has probably taught you for the last 2 years. So you get that little bit of familiarity. Here, you're going to have somebody that's totally independent, totally impartial. And, so you've got to be prepared for that. Candidate instructions are available, and we give guidance for every part and parcel of the assessment strategy. Make sure that you actually read through the candidate manuals and you read the instructions, because what you may think is normal practice for you in the world of work, there may be a little subtle difference on possibly cable sizes or cable types that we have asked for as part and parcel of the specification. So make sure that you read. Number of appeals that we've had in the past is, the equipment was broken, or I couldn't tighten a terminal screw up because it was worn. There are signs within the base saying that if the equipment is not suitable or worn, then you ask the assessor for a replacement. All right, and they should provide you with a suitable replacement. The other thing is, make sure that you've had plenty of fluids. From that, I mean water. Not a couple of bottles of beer or cans of other things in your rucksack. Make sure you've got some water and that you're hydrated, because again, under pressure, you'll find that you'll start sweating a little bit and you get a little bit sort of like jittery. So plenty of water will keep it going. And the other one, don't go out on the beer the night before. Make sure you get a good night's sleep, because this is the end point, as its name suggests, and is, if you like, the stepping stone from being under training and as an apprentice to stepping into that real world where you've got to be responsible for yourself. So that's, if you like, an overview of your own personal preparation, so that you're really, really prepared for it.
So now that you're prepared for the assessment of the AM2S, this is just an introduction into each section one by one, as what it covers. Okay, so as you'll see, section A1, as I previously referenced, is in relation to safe isolation and the risk assessment. Okay, so that's the standalone section there. We've introduced of late, we've split the composite installation up due to some feedback we've received from many of the candidates. We've actually split the composite installation off. So if you fail one section now, you aren't going to reset the whole composite installation. You actually do that particular section you have failed, and we broke it down as fair as possible into what we see sort of feasible for the centres to actually undertake, and cost effectiveness on that aspect. So you can now reset one of the sections. So if there's any apprentice out there who got a previous apprentice who done it last year and failed one aspect, they would have had to go through the whole process and reset the whole composite. Whereas now you've got the advantage of actually resetting just one section within this composite installation. Okay. So section B, we've got the inspection, test and certification. Section C, safe isolation of three circuits. Section D, fault diagnosis and rectification. And Section E is the online examination. Okay. So just returning to the form, the checklist form again to emphasize the importance of that. You will see in the next couple of slides where the aspects of the assessment map across into the checklist. Okay. So first of all, with the Safe Isolation Risk Assessment, there we have the A2 to A6, which is the lighting, three-phase circuit, central heating, and the and the installation of containment. Okay, so there's the various items there going through. Inspection and testing. Each test, there's no hidden agenda here. So when you fill this checklist in, you can see exactly what you've got to test in reference to, and it even states there, test in accordance with BS 7671 and the guidance note 3. You know, there's no giveaway there.
Yeah, it's one of those things with testing and inspecting, and it is that you know, everybody's got a guidance note 3 and seldom open it up. It's really making sure that you do that little bit of research and make sure that you go through it and that you're able to, you know, complete electrical installation forms completely. And
your form filling obviously is critical as well. Take care and have in your form filling. Safe isolation there, again, three circuits. You're seeing this before the assessment, so it's telling you will have to safely isolate a single phase circuit, a three-phase circuit, and the correct sequence on the three-phase installation. So it's there's no hidden agenda in anything we do. It's all open book for you to see well in advance within your training plan, within what you've done achieved in your potential portfolio of work. So this is all geared up into there. So we should all be filtering through from the portfolio to the checklist into the endpoint assessment. So your learning journey should all be geared up to the endpoint assessment process, okay? And again, fault finding and diagnosis and rectification. And then the online exam. The 4 categories, the online exam, aspect of health and safety, BS 7671, building regulations, and inspection and test. So if you're not sure what's going to be in the exam, there it is in front of you, and that's what you've signed for in there. So if you need to brush up on that sort of them sections, if you're unfamiliar with any of them areas.
Yeah, and all the appropriate documents. There's a guide to the building regs, BS 7671, are available for you anyway. So it's not as if it's a closed book affair. Okay, so the next one we can move on to now is we've gone through the checklist so that you can see that the checklist mirrors basically what's in the AM2S. The other thing that you have and is on our website is this little document that you can download if you want to get a tree down, or you can have a look at it from a tablet's perspective. But it's the pre-assessment manual, and what it does in there, it goes into a lot more depth into the various components. So it covers each of those sections that Darren talked about earlier on in quite some depth. It gives you general information about the day, the little things that I said about earlier on about your preparation. It's not only preparation for the actual competency test itself, but it's making sure that you're in that mindset as well. So it's a document that you really need to sort of like go through and study beforehand. And what you've got in there are also areas that we've picked up over the years of some of the common errors. And that's what we're also going to look at a bit later on as well. So some of the common errors that we've had, if we look at safe working practices, basically not demonstrating the correct procedure for safe isolation of supplies. It's one of those things, you know, that there is a set procedure. I know there's a slight variations of it, but there is a set procedure for safe isolation. And if you follow that, then you shouldn't have any problems. I think we talked about it earlier today, Darren, didn't we? But document that you said, yep. Which was that the electricity?
It's the Best Practice Guide 2.
That's the one.
The Electrical Safety Council Best Practice Guide 2, yeah.
So with that, it gives you the step-by-step. And it's one of those things that you need to go away. I mean, it should be done on a daily basis. You just need to make sure that you can do it without thinking, which any good electrician should be. Not proving the test equipment before and after safe isolation. You know, set sequence, you've got a proving unit there, you've got your indicator, onto the proving unit, do your test, back to the proving unit. It's like a little song, you just need to keep it running around inside your head. Yeah. Not leaving the key in a secure place. I know some AM2S centres have a little key safe or a hook to put it on. Other than that, you keep it on your person. You don't leave it lying around. And again, that's for obvious reasons. You know, if you were actually on site, you left a key about and somebody else was working on the same board, didn't realize that you were in a different part of the factory, and think, oh, right, here we go, click, open, power on. Not fitting the warning notices. You know, the number of times you get safe lock-off kits that have got a little notice in them. Add that as well. So those are the sorts of things, you know, that we're finding that people don't do or forget, or they do it in one part of safe isolation and forget it in the next part. Yeah.
Well, one thing for that, Bill, I have, like, speaking to some of the apprentices after post assessment. Some of them haven't. I know there's no. Some of them haven't had the sort of accessibility to safe isolation, and when they're telling me how they've safely isolated on site, it's quite alarming. Now, whatever you learn on site that's down to a site applied process or method you use. But make sure, for the sake of the assessment, the safe isolation is done per book. It has to be done as per best practice guide 2 or whatever other document you're referring to. But it has to be done in line with current regulations. Without that, you will not pass AM2. So bad habits will cost you a fail. Okay. So some of the other common errors within the installation of part of it, okay, the installation simply isn't installed in accordance with BS 7671. The guidance we give in the specification is all around BS 7671. So if there's specifics in the manual, the candidate manual, use this cable, use that cable. There'll be a selection of cables there for you to use. For instance, 10mm or 6mm bonding conductor. Make sure you use a 10mm bonding conductor. The instructions are clearly set out in your specification to tell you what cable to use and where to use it. Okay, so there shouldn't be any excuses. If you can follow instruction, you should be able to follow the candidate manual in line with the specification where it's been designed for. Okay, selecting the wrong type of protective device. Again, you'll have some sort of decoy MCBs in the box, type C's or type B's. In relation to a 16 or 20 amp, read the instructions. Again, we can't emphasize enough, but the simple fact is part of the assessment is, can you follow instruction as well? So you're getting measured in various sort of contexts of the assessment there. I've mentioned wrong size cables and type of conductors. You know, these simple mistakes, but it's all nerves at the end of the day, where we appreciate you may be rushing, or you're a very nervous person, and that's what Bill said. Make sure you have a good night's sleep and just trying to take it in your stride.
I was just going to say on that, we've even had occasions where they've actually put the MCBs in the wrong way around.
Wrong way around, yeah. It's and 9 times out of 10 they wouldn't have done that on site. It's just panicking and worrying and stuff. So we know that has a massive impact as well. Conductors in terminals not sufficiently secured. No, do the tug test. You taught in college, on most of the ones I talked to, they were taught in college, just do a simple tug test, finger and thumb, pull. Is it loose? No. And one of the things which springs to mind on this one is your installation. When you complete it, you may think you've done a sufficient terminal and it's secured, but bear in mind you're going to test afterwards. So a lot of the actual candidates make the error of doing the test, taking the conductor out of the MCB or the socket outlet or the switch or whatever they're doing, and when they put it in, they're not thinking this is going to be assessed afterwards. So they conduct the test, put the conductor back in, tighten it up, not thinking because they're rushing doing the test. The assessor goes to market on the next day. They haven't secured that termination within that MCB or that component. So there's obviously loose connection there. So just double check your connections post-testing as well, right? Not just when you finish the installation, because you're going to work on that again, okay? And conductors not correctly identified. You know, a lot of centres will use 3 browns and they'll use the black and grey tape. A lot of centres then will use the correct coloured conductors, the brown, black and grey, but actually then they'll put brown tape on the grey and black, which you're overdoing what you've done right in the first place. So you're making sure that the conductor is identified as a brown rather than a grey or a black. Okay, so these are some of the common findings which we're finding on a day-to-day basis there.
Yeah, I've just got to point out, I can see there's loads and loads of questions coming in. What we'll do is we'll pick up on those questions towards the end of the presentation. So we're not ignoring them, guys.
Yeah. Continue with the installation. Removing too much insulation or too little insulation. Make sure that there's no exposed copper or within limits when you're looking at a component at 90 degrees or you're looking at an MCB. Is there too much copper showing? It's pretty common sense. There's too much there. You won't pass that criteria on the iPad. Or if you've clamped your insulation within the fuse or within the component, when the assessor strips it down and marks it, you'll be marked down on that one, okay? Circuits do not function effectively. Function is all important. When we switch it on, does the circuit work? Does it function correctly? Okay, again, it's all part of the marking criteria. Segregation of the circuit, the extra voltage or the data cables in this aspect, we don't run them as per BS 7671. We don't put them in the same containment. You will have the correct component to bridge over the in the trunking. Source in the segregated trunking. So use it. It's not there we haven't put it in as an extra. It's there for a purpose. So if you see this white thing in the box, pick it up and use it. There is no hidden. Nobody's trying to get caught out within the endpoint assessment. It's not, and it should be nothing you haven't achieved on site. Hence the checklist. Inspection and testing. These are all this is a fully observed assessment, and you will have an assessor behind you at some point looking at what you're doing. Okay, so you pretty much have to go through a running commentary in your mind and with the assessor to tell the assessor the test you're moving on to and what you're doing. So you can have that constant verbal communication with the assessor. So I'm going to do my first test, continuity of CPCs, and then I'm moving on to doing the installation, just as a polarity or whatever. So you will communicate that with your assessor. Make sure they know what you're doing. Hold your instrument by and show, look, I'm on this scale. This is what I'm doing. Make it obvious. Make it absolutely obvious to that assessor. There's no element of doubt then. If an assessor turns around and says, well, you didn't select the right scale, you can't say, well, I did. It's too late then. You've missed the opportunity. So make sure you don't really want the assessor breathing over your shoulder, because there's nothing worse for the nerves than the assessor breathing over your shoulder. So make it quite obvious to the assessor who's going to be observing from a distance, this is what I'm doing. Have the confidence to do that, and it'll get that. It'll get the assessor sort of. It'll put you more relaxed if the assessor's at more distance. Otherwise, the assessor's got to look at what settings you're using, what tests you're doing. So be confident. Try and get that confidence in your testing, or practicing that. Okay.
It's going with what you're saying there as well, is that, at the end of the day, if there's something that you're not 100% sure of, guidance note 3 and the site guide is available for you there anyway, just to refresh.
Yeah, all the documents are there. Refer to the guidance notes. Don't think the assessor is going to penalise you for reading guidance note. So if you come at nerves again come into it. So if you think you've had a brain freeze or you've gone blank on a certain aspect of the inspection and testing, we know how difficult it can be for you. You've just come out of the installation. You're going into testing. There's a lot of things going through your mind at the time moving on. So just take your time. Use the guidance note. They're all there for you. There's no hidden agenda here. The test results. Take care when completing your paperwork. Put the values in the right boxes. Use the correct decimalization of, for instance, a 6 kA breaker. It's a 6 kA or a 10 kA. It's not a 6,000 or a 10,000. So use the correct terminology as it is expected on the thing. So if you see a KA, it means 6, not 10,000 KA. So be correct in your login and your recording of information on the test result sheets and the EIC you're expected to fill in. Okay, because we are expecting it to be filled in to industry practice as you would present to your local authority for sign off by building control or what your professional body, whoever you're a member of. Okay, so we are expecting it to be at that standard. Okay. Test results not verified, so we are expecting you not just to obtain the values, but we want the apprentices and all the candidates within the network to actually understand the values, what is the importance of them values and where they reference. So you will be expected within that assessment to reference BS 7671 as to where and why to validate your result. Not every single one of them, but there will be an element of you to sort of reference how you use the regs book in relation to a reading you've obtained. Okay, so don't think I'm just going to do a test that I don't need to do anything else. And this is nothing you should have been taught at your training provider regarding using the regulations and testing your values. So that will definitely be expected of you and is. Okay, and then the candidate doesn't verify that the installed circuit is functioning as intended. So if you do switch on and they sort of testing. When you test your installation and you find you've got an incorrect polarity, for instance, or you found a wrong connection, and you think, oh, that's not going to work when I function that now. Well, that gives you the opportunity then. You found it on the test. That's the reason we test, to put your installation right. You will be allowed the time there within the testing to rectify the faults you've identified with inspection testing. Okay, and that's common practice. That happens on site on a day-to-day basis. So that's why we say, if you find the fault, don't panic. The assessor's over your shoulder. You haven't done anything wrong at that point. You've just done the proper job in testing, and you're going to rectify that within that time. Okay, so don't panic at that stage. And again, like I mentioned earlier, make sure your connections are reinstated and secure on completion of testing.
Yeah, we've got the safe isolation. So this is very similar again, what we had earlier on. It's the same things really. You might have gone through the first process of safe isolation before you start the build, and no problems at all. And then all of a sudden, you know, from that point of view of being prepared, you forget a few things. So, you know, you forget to turn off other circuits, candidates not check switches on the circuit, not leaving the key in a secure place, not fitting the warning notices. So it's really sort of like drilling that safe isolation process in, so that once you've done it once, it becomes sort of like second nature. Yeah.
And I think another common one with this one, Bill, is they take the board cover off first off as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Board cover removed, you know, so they perform an unsafe act immediately. So what they, rather than do it from the MC, they'll actually remove the because it is live. They do this is a live test procedure. So they'll take off the fuse board cover or the distribution board cover directly before even doing safe isolation, I think. So that's one of the common errors on this one as well. Okay. Fault diagnosis and rectification. Faults are not correctly identified. Now, yeah, there's a certain limits of faults we verbally accept or recorded. They are itemized for the candidates to pick. You know, the short circuit, misconnection, open circuit are there for them to see. So they need to identify which is the fault. Isn't this, again, it's one of the four. A high resistance is the other one. So there's four options there for them. So they've got a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right up front. And then they have to give some a clear detail. Be specific in your detail and how you identify the conductor that the fault is on, and the location, the actual. So if it's socket 6, for instance, socket 6 line conductor. You know, be specific in telling us where that fault is. Don't just say the fault is in socket 6. Doesn't mean anything to us, and it doesn't rectify the problem. So you have to go through the full, how you would do it on site, how you found the fault, and how you're going to rectify it. Be clear in how you're going to rectify it, what component the fault is on, and what conductor it's impacting on that aspect of that. And then the rectification, how are you going to put it right? You're going to need to retest it. So if you've got a short circuit, for instance, you're replacing any cable you're replacing, you're going to have to retest. You know, you're not a common one there. Or rewire the circuit, and then you just put continuity test. It doesn't. If you do a rewire, if you rewire a circuit, I know it's on a small simulated area, you're actually finding that fault. But if you're going to rewire the circuit, you're going to have to do a full retest. So make sure you don't just put continuity and installation resistance, because you're going to be required to do a lot more than that. Okay, that will not be accepted if you're just giving them a minimum test of continuity, installation resistance. Okay, and then the online assessment, again, we've had the breakdown within the checklist of what you're going to be tested on. That's basically an online exam which you've all gone through within your technical certificates previously, or hopefully, and that's no different to what you're there. We've got there BSM 671 building regs.
Yeah, as I say, the books are there, so it's really just getting your way around the book again. So, and like Darren has already said, you know, the 18th edition is part and parcel of the qualification to get here. So there shouldn't really be any sort of like issues with that. So what we've now got from a point of view of the assessors within the centre is that any time that they see something that they're going to put a no down that you haven't achieved, they will take an image. So from that perspective, every single time that something is not been done to the criteria, an image is taken. And what we've done here is we've just taken some samples of the sorts of things that we actually get. So from a point of view of you know, a candidate saying, well, yeah, I did my PVC conduit perfectly, no problem at all. If it isn't, then a photograph is taken, and you'll also see from that the assessor also annotates it to give us some indication. So if any appeals come in, you know, we can go back and look at it. So it's not no subjectivity around it at all.
Yeah, and these are they time stamped, and you can't see it on this one because I've taken it off for obvious reasons. But they are time stamped, and the assessor's name will be in the corner as well, with the time this was actually marked and who assessed that as well. It's you know, we get so many appeals, and the evidence is there now. We've improved systems on point systems, so the evidence is there for all to be seen that it doesn't quite. And I think this slide is quite important. I'm looking at the names attendees today, and some are training providers as well as apprentices. So it's good for the training providers to see that, you know, when we go into a few slides, you know, this is the evidence we collate from our moderations when we do our the assessments completed. You know, this is the due diligence checks we have behind the scenes as well as just the assessor, this centre as well. So we do our checks behind the scenes as well.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of conscious of time as well. So we'll go through some of these so you can see the sorts of things we've got. You know, for example, there's one there where there's spaces on the electrical installation certificate. You can clearly, well, just about clearly see. It's not a particularly good image, but you can see there that there's copper, well, not copper, there's conductors actually, bare conductors actually physically shown when it goes into the terminal.
Yeah. And then on the other one, then you've got someone's actually put the BS number for an isolator, where we'd expect to see the 60898 on the MCB on the type of device, the BS number. Some further ones there. The RCBO and exposed copper again on the conductor there. And these are just emphasising what I said earlier on regarding the conductors, the brown, black and the grey being retaped, exposed copper again. We also take the image of the conduits now on the AM2S so we can see the number of threads exposed. There's no fly lead or banjo nut and bolt on there coming off the SWA. The inner sheath of the SWA isn't protruding through the gland there, so the assessor's rightly taken that picture. Some more exposed copper pictures, and again a classic one where the key's been left on top of the fuse board. The assessor's lucky enough, he's taken a picture of that. Unfortunately, the candidate obviously failed that element. And again, just showing you that that's an image of a timestamp. The time they sign into the centre at 7:40 in the morning, they'll go through every section of the AM2 is time stamped when they go on and when they complete that assessment. Everything is time stamped by that assessor. And another one there about levels on the conduit, which has been installed for the containment. Yeah.
Yeah. So from that perspective, I mean, we usually get something about marking and feedback. So you can see from that really that the assessment is marked against strict and objective criteria. So in most cases, the assessor is saying, has he achieved that particular criteria or not? If it's no, then he'll take an image and provide us with an explanation. So what you've got to remember there is that the assessor does not actually give any personal judgment on the marking criteria and has got no opinion. It's fully independent. It's either right to the criteria or no, it's not. The other thing is, of course, is that any assessment can only be based on what you actually physically do on the day. Unfortunately, sometimes if you're not really prepared or you're a bit jittery or a bit nervous, 110 times, you know, you'll do something right, and just the one occasion that you don't do it quite right happens to be within the endpoint assessment. Just to give you a case in point, my daughter went for a trailer test, okay, and she's been practicing and practicing and practicing to put the actual trailer onto the back of the vehicle, and in her test, she, instead of winding it down, she undid the jockey wheel and bang, it went down, and that was the end of it. So with that perspective, you just got to make sure that sometimes the feedback has got to be relatively generic as well, because we can't give you specific feedback, because that then gives you an indication of the actual physical criteria of what it's being assessed against. So this is the type of feedback that we actually physically give you. So you can see from there that you've got an installation of a lighting circuit. The candidate did not achieve the required standard, and basically there's the options underneath. Wasn't following the specification issued. The connections weren't to industry standard. The installed circuit was not completed to a fully functioning standard. Selecting the correct equipment, positioning the equipment to the specification issued, or selecting the correct cable as per specification. The thing is, if we gave you specific detail of what you physically did wrong,
you spend weeks or months learning how to drive, then the driving test is where you put everything into practice and you're marked to meet strict criteria. The AM2 and AM2S are just like this. It's an in-depth assessment where you have to carry out specific tasks to show what you've learned.
What happened there?
I don't know. No idea.
Oh, bugs in the system. Yeah. The assessment basically is going back to the feedback, is that, again, giving that specific detailed feedback. You know yourselves from a social media perspective, is everybody talks to everybody else. And in next to no time, all we'll have out there is a complete list of all the criteria, how to pass it, and then it becomes basically a train to pass exercise, not an assessment of competence. You've got to think for yourself within these things. From a resit perspective, if you are unsuccessful, go back and look at those areas that you didn't achieve. Go back to the pre-checklist, go back in there and go again and re-practice, retrain, do everything you can to cover those areas. So don't just go and think, oh, well, I failed that now, rebook, and I'm sure I'll get it right next time. Go back and look at all the materials on our website. We've got quite a variety of materials available, which I think further on we've got some details of how you can access those. If you resit on too many occasions, we will inquire, whether you've had sufficient training. We do keep an eye on those things.
Okay, so going on to misconceptions, these are sort of things we've picked up, and I've certainly heard on my travels over the years in the industry, working in many colleges across the UK. The assessor didn't like me. This is the way I always done it on site, and it's fine. So they argue with it back, and they say this is fine. It's right. No, it's not. It's got to be as installed per industry standard, or it's unacceptable. The assessor didn't like me. Net wants us to fail so they can make more money on a resit. Couldn't be further from the truth. We can all sit here. As Bill said, Net is a charity, invests money in the industry. That's not the case. The centre doesn't even want you to fail, because we would rather have a floods of the AM2 apprentices. If there's any backlogs within any centres, they want to clear any backlogs to get the next apprentice in. They don't want to pick the resets up. They'd rather have full assessments rather than any reset. I can vouch for probably more centres on the call or on the webinar. I failed because the inadequate equipment or materials. Okay, well, we can't police that on a day-to-day basis, and historically we haven't been able to police it. Okay, we get numerous complaints. The feedbacks we give out, we've had so many feedback from apprentices. The material in that centre wasn't any good. Well, how can we police that on a day-to-day basis? Absolutely impossible. So we do our day-to-day visits, which was restricted in COVID, so face-to-face. So we've had to manage it sort of over Teams, like everybody's been working and embraced this new culture of working. But what we've also done now is implemented, like Bill said earlier, we put posters, and every single bay will contain a poster which will say to every candidate, if you're not happy with the materials, you're well within your rights to replace that component or that faulty bit of equipment you've got, okay? So just for all you, the future assessments of anybody's going into AM2 shortly or next week, the week after, make sure you're aware of that poster. Ask your assessor for materials if you're not happy with them. The last thing we want is someone to fail because they had some faulty equipment. And in fairness to the assessors, you can't expect the assessor to strip down, mark the job, and then physically check every single component. We're all humans, so if there is something in there which is warned, it's an oversight and it's been missed out. So like I said, we're all human beings. Help work with the assessment team. Tell them you want a new piece of equipment, and job done. Okay, you won't be caught by that one. The centre is more successful than that one. Again, I can't really say any centre is more successful than one. It shouldn't be the case. If you were all completing your checklist as honestly as possible, every single centre is policed and moderated on a day-to-day basis. So we see it from our point of view as depending on the calibre of the apprentices. You can't gauge the centre's performance against the centre, the actual centre itself. they're an endpoint assessment centre who are signed up by us and regulated by us and policed by us. So we see every single one of our centres doing as honest possible job as they can do within our watchful eye and our restrictions. They adhere to the license we've got in place for them, so they do the job they have been told to do, and they guide it to as much as possible. So a lot of the time, it's down to the actual calibre of the apprentices going through certain areas, certain apprentices. That's all we can say. But all centres, just to do with this myth or this misconception, I go to that centre because I get a pass. That's all I can say is totally wrong. Okay, so that's blow that one out of the water from here.
Yeah, well, we've got a quality assurance process in place. I mean, there are going to be slight variations between each individual centres, but from a consistency point of view, they're very much all the same. I mean, the reason why we've got the assessment where it's basically a yes or a no, it's a criteria, take an image, is probably one of the best assessment systems I've seen. And for this length of time, the AM2 has been going for about 30 odd years. We're in a situation now where it's still fit for purpose. So, we try and audit right the way across the country to ensure that all the centres are on a par. We do standardisation events, and we've got another one coming up relatively soon for all the assessors, and we do keep an eye on things.
Yeah, so we just need to reassure the audience really that we are doing everything possible we can to police all of this, and it's certainly, by the likes of me and Bill, there's no way we want to see anybody sort of slipping through the net in the aspect of shortcomings within any assessment centres. We do our best now.
Okay, so from the resources, it basically go onto our website. You'll see there that the checklists are there, the pre-assessment manuals. There's a series of top tips videos. We're in the process at the moment of doing an interactive resource for inspection and testing. There's details of how to find a net centre right the way across the country. So again, if you're looking at it from a perspective as my local AM2S centre is fully booked, then there's another one down the road where you should be able to get in. So everything's on there, including frequently asked questions and preparation all the way through. So just go to www.netservices.org.uk and all things are in there that you should be able to access. Okay, so from our perspective, we've probably gone on a little bit longer than anticipated, and we will start to try and get back and answer some of your questions.
Perfect. Perfect, Bill. Let me first just gonna put in front of you our survey. So if you guys can just tell us how you feel about this webinar today, that would be good for us just to be sure that we're doing a good job. The survey is in front of you on the screen. If you guys can just pick the choices, I'll appreciate it. There are a lot of questions, which is good. Let's see if we can manage to get them one by one. There were a couple of questions that go in the same direction, which is if NET will be providing overall national achievement rates and achievement rates per center. Also, people asking, where can we find out the achievement rate percentages? So could you guys just clarify that a bit?
Yeah, basically, as an endpoint assessment organisation, there's no regulatory reason that we have to put out pass rates. No other endpoint assessment organisation puts out pass rates for their endpoint assessment. So we're just sticking in line with government regulation.
Okay. There was one question which is from Rob. Let me try to find this one to publish for you. Let me just find this one here. So there's a few people saying that it's a good question, saying with regards to safe isolation, do the bays have a hook for the padlock keys that's considered a secure place for the key, or is it to be placed into the student pocket?
This one is if the student. This is another one which comes from feedback from the centres actually. What the centres were finding, the key was going in and was expected to be placed safely on the apprentice for many years. But the rate that the centres were going through padlocks was a bit unbelievable, really. So what we introduced there, we've introduced a hook just outside of the bay. It's got safe key safe on the hook. So if they use the hook in the safe place, that's sufficient. But if the candidate decides to put it in the pocket, that's fine as well. They won't be penalised for that. But they can either put it in the identified key safe area, which is the hook, or they can keep it in the pocket in person.
Perfect. Question from Adrian. Why is the AM2E assessment the same as the AM2S assessment? Because one is for apprentices, the other one is for people who have been working in the industry for more than 5 years?
Yeah, that was basically from the employer group. When the AM2E was basically sort of like developed, they wanted it to maintain the same standards as the apprenticeship route. So that's why the AM2E mirrors the AM2S.
Okay. So there's a few questions in the beginning of the webinar. What's the difference between the AM2 and the AM2S? I understand that by now this should be answered. So yeah. Lewis, if you...
Well, that one really, the difference between the two is because of the containment. The original AM2 had containment in it, but in 2010 that was taken out. But the standard has changed, so it's gone back in again.
Perfect. So question from Rob. Are lighting circuits to be wired triplet at the ceiling rows, or is it required to triplet at the switch as it becoming more common on new builds, not accounting from conduit type connections with a looped live between switches?
Yeah, so there's Rob, I'll just eliminate that. There's no 3-plate at the ceiling rows.
Good. Rob also asked if SY cables should be identified as no compliance.
It is notified on the electrical installation certificate. We've actually filled that in on the electrical installation certificate.
Okay. Adrian asks, with regards to the minimum insulation resistant value and quotating BS7671 at 1 meg OHM or GN3 for new installations at 20 meg OHM.
Yeah, Adrian, what they do, they're asked to reference their reading. So if a candidate was to reference the BS7671 meg ohm, or the guidance note 3 for the new installations at 20 meg ohm, we'd accept both. Funny enough, this is one of the ones we plan to discuss coming up in the next standardization between us. We've had a few discussions regarding this lately, but they're asked to reference. When we check the reference and when the assessor checks the reference, if it's the 20 meg ohm from the GN3 or the 7671 meg ohm, they're both acceptable values in that case.
Perfect. This question was originally by Chris and reshared by Adrian, which is, I wonder if you could clarify something for me. In guidance notes 3 on page 51, it suggested that we can perform an insulation resistance test with the L and N connected together to earth rather than disconnected any equipment. Do we just test normally between all conductors, and then what are net position on this? If it's allowed, will net accept an EIC with one live earth insulation resistant filled in? And any qualification will be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, this is obviously fully observed by the assessor and is fully acceptable within the guidance note as well. So we'd expect the assessor to make some kind of comment where they're expected to put notes on that, because if the comment is empty within the sort of life to life, and we'd identify that, the assessor would reinforce that by some kind of annotation on the test form, which is allowed to do. Because this is an acceptable form of test, you couldn't really penalise the apprentice for that or the candidate for that. So we'd expect the assessor then to annotate within the on the iPad to state that the apprentice conducted this test safely. But it wouldn't really. It also says there conduct this test due to vulnerable equipment as well. I think this is one we had through the other day, yeah. And then another one. This has been a recent inquiry actually. So this is another one we're looking at to put in something in the guidance for the apprentices and the assessors. But if it is conducted in this manner and this way, we can't penalise them for doing it this way. But there's no vulnerable equipment, or shouldn't be in a sense, because everything is disconnectable from the circuit anyway. So although they'd be expected to identify the vulnerable equipment, they'd also be expected then to safely disconnect it, unplug it. There's no catch. There's no transformers in the circuit where they can actually cause damage and stuff. So we would expect them to firstly disconnect the vulnerable equipment anyway, which would give them no reason to perform the combined test. But if they do, to answer the question, yeah, no problem.
Perfect. Question from Adrian. Are there minor fails and major fails? If so, how many minors make a major, and if it's per session or over the whole assessment?
We have critical failure marks. So if there are areas where it's a safety issue, that's an automatic fail. What we do have is a percentage. If you look on the assessment plan, it gives an overall percentage pass mark, and we apply that per section.
Perfect.
Sorry, Bill, the apprenticeship assessment plan, the apprenticeship standard.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the apprenticeship standard assessment plan. Sorry, yeah.
It's available on the Institute of Apprenticeships, isn't it?
Yeah. So what we do is for every section, we ensure that each section, the pass mark is in line with the assessment plan, which I think is around about 70%.
So question from Matthew, if there is a minimum or max distance for the bubble set?
Yes, is the answer, Matthew. The distance will be given to you in your candidate guidance document.
Perfect. And Sean asked if there is any device or PPE for the day of the assessment.
Again, check with the centre, but as long as, from a point of view, is your normal work clothes and safety boots and glasses if necessary, if you're doing any cutting.
Folks, if there is any question from the beginning of the webinar that maybe I skipped, if you guys can just make it for me again, that would be good. What's one here about Sean asking, do we need to use torque screwdrivers on the day?
No.
No. Now, all the tools are provided by the AM2 Centre. There's no requirement for you to bring any tools whatsoever. And again, I did see a question earlier on about test instruments, that AM2S Centre supply test instruments. Again, this is to make sure that a serviceable piece of equipment is available on the day and is suitably calibrated for the conditions. What we don't want is an apprentice turning up and saying, "Oh, damn, I forgot me tester," or "Oh, batteries have run out on my tester."
Or impact drivers on the equipment as well.
That's it. So what we'd, from an AM2S perspective, is everything is supplied.
There's a question there, 1314 from David Watts.
This one, if there is a penalty strategy for any form of private training companies and FE colleges that ignore the candidate guidance and push learners through to claim their funding. Also, how can AM2 centers that are also training organizations get away with selling M2 practice courses?
Well, I'll take the first part. There is no penalty strategy to private training providers. All we've got is, as far as we're concerned as an assessment organization, is that they're signing a document to say that the apprentice or the candidate, I should say, is ready for the assessment. So from that perspective, about pushing learners through to claiming funding, that's an ESFA, an Institute of Apprenticeships issue.
There's a contractual agreement on that as well, Bill, isn't there? So if they're doing it, they kind of like any contract, they're legally breaking the law with that, in essence, of putting them forward. So there's got to be an element of trust in what they're doing. So on their conscience be it, really, Dave, if that's what they're doing, and it does go on. They're breaking contractual law within that, with it for the ESFA. If you heard of any, feel free to whistleblow.
I mean, from our perspective, we're getting a checklist that is signed by the employer, the candidate, and the training provider to say that they're ready to go with an assessment. and that's all we can do.
Right.
Yeah.
The AM2 Centre are also selling training or train. The AM2 license is issued to an AM2 Centre. Okay, so I've personally seen some advertisement of late on sort of some social media platforms selling AM2, and the ones we've picked up were linked to AM2. We've actually been in touch with ASAP to tell them to take it off, because AM2 centres, and I'll make it quite clear, an AM2 licensed centre cannot sell a practice course. Now, that's where NET stand on this. An AM2 centre cannot sell a practice course. Now, I think the rest sort of is well, probably Bill will want to pick up on it perhaps, but that's all I can say from our perspective as an endpoint assessment. And they're within the license agreement, they're not allowed to sell a practice course.
Now, as part of the license centre, the thing that you've got there, of course, is that the license centre may be slightly separate from the other part of the training organisation or college. And again, it's something that's very difficult to police. It's like somebody giving driving lessons, isn't it? That isn't a driving instructor.
Perfect. So getting back to, there's a lot of questions about tools. Yeah, so I think we covered the question from Adrian, which was, why can apprentices use their own multifunction testers? I think we covered that as a matter of calibration. But Matthew is also asking about cutters, if we can use our own cutters. And Elliot is asking, can we take our own tools? So maybe we could clarify which tools can they take and which ones they cannot.
Yeah, it's quite straightforward. There are no tools. All tools are supplied. And again, that's because from a safety issue, it may well be that your cutters may not conform. Chances are that they probably will, but we make sure that everything that's required from a point of view of doing the installation is available on the day, because again, you may turn up with your toolbox and you've left your cutters at home.
Yeah, and regarding test equipment, is something we've spoken about before. It's down to the liability insurance of the centres as well. They are liable for their own equipment. They test in live on equipment, and it's down to the insurance purposes. If someone's using their own equipment they brought into the centre, there's all sorts of ramifications of that should something go wrong. So to eliminate that risk, we've clearly said that the centre supplies the test equipment, and that's why we emphasise the fact, Darren, regarding find out what test equipment in advance. You're well within your rights to do that, as well as any apprentices.
Perfect. The last question here from Daniel. Do you have diagrams or specifications of the exam that we'll be installing so we can look over and revise?
Again, no. You'll have the diagrams on the day. Again, it's basically the checklist and the pre-assessment manual give an indication of the sorts of things that you're going to cover. So what we're looking for is a measure of competence, that you can actually interpret a diagram, that you can actually install to that diagram, rather than something that you've practiced.
Perfect. Okay, that was the last question that we have. Do you guys have any last question? Well, a couple more minutes maybe that we can stay in, if there is anyone with a last question.
I think there's one there from Chris Walker of 1347. Where do we get feedback from, and where do we get it?
What's that?
1347.
I don't see that one. Which one is it? From whom?
Chris Walker.
Chris Walker, yeah.
Where do we get the feedback from, and when do we get it?
Okay.
I've asked it, Bill. You
Yeah, well, the feedback is sent to the candidate on completion of the assessment. So what you've got there is that the assessment is completed on one day. There's up to 5-day window from a moderation point of view, and then the results are issued. So the feedback goes out to the candidate after that time.
Perfect. I can see that we have some users typing, so just wait a second to see if there is any last question coming in. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so Darren, Bill, I think we can close up here. I think it was a pretty good webinar, an hour and 10. So I think that was a pretty fantastic. A lot of questions. Any last message, Darren, Bill?
From my perspective, just to thank everybody that's attended today. And if you are taking your AM2S in the near future, I wish you all the best of luck.
Yeah, good luck. Thanks everyone. Thanks for attending once again to another webinar from Voltimum. Thanks to Voltimum, and thanks you all. Cheers. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you everyone from NET from supporting us this, and see you guys next time. Just remember that this webinar is being recorded, so the recording is available tomorrow at voltimum.co.uk. Also, the PowerPoints that Bill and Darren showed us will also be available for download tomorrow on our website. Thank you everybody, and see you soon. See you next time.
Bye.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much. Bye now.